Okay, get ready for this. What if you could create the blueprint for human life without an egg, without a sperm, and without even fertilization? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually happening in labs as we speak. Today, we're going to dive deep into the science of stem cell-based embryo models, a breakthrough that could literally change everything we think we know about how life begins.
I mean, just think about that question for a second. It completely upends our most basic understanding of biology. Imagine being able to watch the earliest, most mysterious moments of human development unfold in a lab dish, not from a fertilized egg, but just by convincing stem cells to build themselves. Well, this isn't a hypothetical anymore. This is real.
So what do we call these things? The official term is stem cell-based embryo models, or SCBEMs for short. You can think of them as lab-grown blueprints of an early embryo, built from the ground up, entirely from stem cells. And thanks to some incredible recent breakthroughs from teams at the Weizmann Institute and Cambridge University, this technology has just been catapulted into the spotlight. And as you can imagine, it's forcing a massive global conversation about the very definition of life itself.
Now, before we get into all the complex ethics, and believe me, they are really complex, let's first talk about why scientists are so incredibly excited about this. See, the vast majority of the applications for this tech aren't about reproduction at all. They're about opening up entirely new worlds for medical research.
And the potential here is just enormous. We're talking about finally understanding exactly how our organs form in the first place. We could generate replacement tissues for people who need them. We could model devastating genetic diseases from their very start to figure out what's going wrong. We could test new drugs with unbelievable precision and safety, even improve the success rates of IVF. This is a scientific toolkit that could truly redefine medicine as we know it.
So what makes these models such a game changer for researchers? Well, they solve some of the biggest problems scientists have been stuck on for decades. For one, they give us a window into the first few weeks of development, a period that's always been a total black box. They also help us reduce our reliance on animal models, which, aren't perfect stand-ins for humans. And, maybe most importantly, they offer an alternative to using donated human embryos, helping us navigate a huge ethical minefield.
But whenever science takes a leap this massive, it always raises equally massive questions. The second you create a model of an embryo in a lab, you are stepping onto a brand new ethical frontier. This is the point where the science collides head-on with our deepest cultural, legal, and social values, especially when we start talking about the possibility of using them for reproduction.
This quote from Singapore's High Court just gets right to the heart of the matter. Our laws, our cultures, our societies, they're all built around fundamental ideas like heredity and blood ties. So what happens when a technology comes along that could completely rewrite those rules? To really dig into this challenge, Singapore is a fascinating case study.
You see, in Singapore, the legal system places a huge amount of weight on what it calls genetic affinity, that biological link between a parent and their child. But an offspring from an SCBM would be a genetic copy of just one person. This idea directly challenges the legal and social bedrock of the family unit in a way that lawmakers are simply not prepared for.
Let's be really clear about what this would mean in practice. If you take stem cells from one person, you create an SCBM from only those cells, and if it could ever be brought to term, the result would be a genetically identical replicate. In other words, it would be a clone. And that runs straight into a legislative brick wall like Singapore's Human Cloning and Other Prohibited Practices Act.
And the hurdles are just immense. In Singapore, assisted reproduction is already super tightly controlled. So the idea of same-sex couples using this technology or solo parenthood through what is essentially cloning just directly contradicts existing law. And even a potential workaround, like maybe blending cells to create what's called a chimeric model, comes with its own serious health risks that raise a whole different set of ethical alarms.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit, because this isn't just a challenge for one country. The entire world is grappling with this right now. And what we have is a total patchwork of rules. It's like a global puzzle, where every country is trying to fit a brand new, oddly shaped piece into a very, very old board.
And what's fascinating is just how wildly different the approaches are. I mean, look at this. Take Australia. Their definition of embryo is so broad that these models are already regulated. Then you have Japan and the UK, which for now see them as something totally distinct. Germany takes a hard line, banning all embryo research, period. And in the US? Well, it's a chaotic mix of state laws and funding restrictions. There is absolutely no global consensus.
And in the middle of all this regulatory chaos, for decades, research on human embryos has been guided by one very famous boundary, the 14-day rule. This rule says you cannot culture an embryo in a lab beyond 2 weeks. That's roughly when a key structure appears that marks the beginning of an individual body plan. For a long time, this has been the ethical line in the sand.
But here's the problem. That rule was designed for embryos made by fertilization, which gives you a very clear day zero to start counting from. SCBEMs don't have that. They're assembled from stem cells and they develop at different speeds. So how on earth do you apply a strict time limit to something that doesn't follow a predictable clock? The old rules just don't fit the new science.
And this really gets to the core of the debates we're all having right now. What is the moral status of these models? Are they just a clump of cells, or do they represent potential life? And what is that potential? Could they actually develop into a human being? Could they ever develop consciousness or the ability to feel pain? And are the people donating their cells fully aware of how they might be used? These are the profound questions at the absolute center of it all.
So, with all this complexity, where do we go from here? What is the path forward? How do we navigate this incredible new world in a way that balances amazing scientific progress with our ethical responsibility and, maybe most importantly, with public trust? Well, one of the key voices trying to create some order here is the International Society for Stem Cell Research, or the ISSCR. Now, their guidelines aren't law, but they are hugely influential around the world. They call for specialized ethical review. They draw a hard red line against ever transferring these models into a uterus. And they suggest that while the 14-day rule could be relaxed someday, it can only happen after a massive open public conversation. And out of all these discussions, a really powerful recommendation is starting to emerge, and it's this: don't try to cram SCBEMs into old laws that were written for natural embryos. It just doesn't work. Instead, the idea is to create a totally separate, distinct regulatory path just for them. This allows for rules that are actually designed for this specific technology, rules that are flexible, tailored, and proportionate to the unique issues they raise.
So the takeaways for policymakers seem pretty clear. First, every nation needs to seriously review its existing laws. They absolutely have to engage the public in a real dialogue, kind of like what Singapore does with its Bioethics Advisory Committee. They should explore new, adaptive ideas like regulatory sandboxes to let innovation happen safely. And critically, that ban on reproductive use, it needs to be cemented in actual, enforceable hard law to build and maintain public trust.
Look, this technology is moving at an incredible speed. It holds the promise to solve diseases by unlocking the deepest mysteries of our own creation. But it also forces us to look in the mirror and confront what it really means to be human. The ultimate question isn't just about what science can do, but what it should do. And as we stand on this new frontier, making sure our ethics evolve just as quickly as our science, well, that's going to be our greatest challenge of all.